This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Dr. Laurie Betito is a clinical psychologist, host of the popular sex and relationship show Passion on CJD here in Montreal. And she's also the author of a new book called The Sex Bible for People Over 50, The Complete Guide to Sexual Love for Mature Couples. Laurie joins us on the line right now from here in Montreal. Hi, Laurie.
Hey, how are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks for being on the program with us.
Thank you.
So, a guide to sex at 50 and beyond. You know, the biggest part of the population has always been, for the longest time, baby boomers. So it doesn't surprise me that a book like that would come out. But is it really different than under 50?
Of course. First of all, lots of changes happen. You and I both know, Peter, being over 50, that we're not the same as when we were 20. Even if our minds stay the same, more or less, our bodies do change. And there's adaptations. So our sexuality is not a constant thing. It is always, it's fluid, it's in flux. And as we age, changes happen. But that doesn't mean it's worse. It just means it's different. So I wanted to at least make people aware of these changes that are perfectly normal changes, because people tend to panic when they're no longer the same, when they don't function the same way. I get men panicking because their erections aren't as hard as they once were. They don't know what's wrong with them. And, you know, women who suddenly have pain with intercourse and they don't know what's wrong with them, and they're not sure. Is it age? Is it menopause? So I wanted to just clarify, you know, and looked at all the potential issues that can happen with age and how to adapt to that so we can have the best sex of our lives.
You've been doing the radio show for about 15 years now. Is this book an outgrowth of some of the questions that have come up in the show, or is it totally unrelated?
No, it's completely an outgrowth not only of my listenership and the questions, which if we look at the statistics in terms of my listenership, my average listener is somewhere in the 45 to 55, age range. So most of those listeners fall within that category. So they have questions, many questions about sexual functioning later. But I've also been a clinician for the last 24 years. So in my practice, I also see that. So that, these are the questions that come up. And again, people feel like they're abnormal for some reason. And that's what I wanted to dispel, really look at some of the myths.
As you say, the change is natural, but generally speaking, as a society, are we too tied into our sexuality being our being? In other words, it's a part of who we are, but it's not all of who we are.
Right. And it should not be all of who we are, because if we put everything into our genitals and our genitals malfunction, then who are we? We don't want that. So this book explores sexuality in a much wider scope of sexuality. Sexuality is not just about penis and vagina. And often this is what we hear when we think of the word sex. That's what people think about. And that's what I wanted to get away from, because sexuality can mean many, many different things. The problem is that when there's a problem with sex, it takes up a lot of space in a relationship. When everything is working fine, then it's not as important. So I wanted to get to a point where we can avoid having these problems. And it opens up the communication, too, by couples reading this book together.
Speaking of couples, generally speaking, who do you find is more apt to be open about discussing this, men or women?
It's not just that who's apt to be discussing it. Men tend to bring up the subject more often, probably because men are the ones who might have the higher sex drive than women. At least that's how it's expressed. For the most part, I'm generalizing here. But the ones who seek answers are often women. They're the ones buying all the self-help books, right? The men aren't pulling those off the shelf. The women are. So I wanted a book that actually men would find appealing too, which is why I put pictures in it, naked pictures. Gotcha. I know that sounds rather sexist in reverse, but I thought I was polling all my guy friends, and they felt that would be an incentive.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that sex does change with age. So do you have a few ideas, generally speaking, how to adapt to that change?
Well, part of it depends what you're adapting to, right? So as we age, we could have different difficulties, like some people develop arthritis or some people develop other kind of chronic ailments or pain and what have you, things that are unrelated to our sexual functioning, but that impact sex. So I have chapters on positions, for example, how to adapt to different positions using the old way, but adapting in a new way to relieve the pressure off bad knees, bad back, etc. That's one thing. The other thing is how to take care of your genitals as they age. So a big chapter on female sexual health and female changes. So for, making sure that women keep their vaginas in good working order, but that requires, some maintenance, if you will, some oiling to some degree, and men too. So when men happen to have the occasional erectile dysfunction, when does it require medication, or when does it require intervention, and when does it not require intervention? So it's kind of knowing the difference and how to adapt to that.
Is it also a sign that if you're having problems sexually, and I'm looking at this now from the male point of view, that sometimes that's a sign of other problems besides, in other words, the lack of sexual activity, or not activity, but proficiency can be a sign of another problem within the body?
I think that's a great point. Yes, it can be a sign of another problem within the body. So, for example, erectile dysfunction in men, the first thing I have them do is have a blood workup done to make sure that, they don't have anything else going on in their blood work. Also, we look for blood flow. So if the blood isn't flowing to the penis, it usually means it's not flowing elsewhere. So we want to look at that. So you check blood pressure, you check other things. So that's really, really important to look at, But I'm also looking at it another way. Sometimes couples that have sexual problems, the sexual problems are a symptom of the relationship, of something else. So that's another way of also looking at it. But in the way that I wrote this book for couples who don't have other difficulties, like where the only real issues come affecting sexuality.
Besides the physical, with age, what about the mental part? Does one's desire diminish, or is that a myth?
The desire, it is a myth because it's not true that desire completely, that it diminishes. There's a difference between desire and interest, okay? Sometimes we confound the two. So when we talk about desire, we talk about someone's level of horniness, if you will, right? The spontaneous desire for sexual activity. That may diminish, and for women especially, about 3/4 of women will describe that, but their interest in sex isn't affected. So they would still want to, they just need the conditions to be right. So their motivation for sex, that's really what we're looking at, is one's motivation. So instead of desire, we look at the motivation.
A lot can be learned by people who read the Sex Bible for people over 50 who are in that age group. Can a lot be learned by somebody reading this who is younger?
Well, I had this one, I was giving a talk at a CJEP, and he said, I'm buying your book. I want to be prepared. You've got a ways to go to be prepared. But so anybody who wants to expand their sexual repertoire, this book is useful for, because there are chapters on how to stretch your boundaries as well. So, knowledge is power. So getting this book prior to turning 50 so that you're aware of some of the potential changes that will occur later on will better prepare you for your later life sexuality.
Plus, as you say, you give tips on ideas of positions and other things. So variety is the spice of life, right? It doesn't have to be just for those over 50.
That's right. Exactly.
Laurie, I thank you very, very much for being on the program to talk with us. It's great to have a chance to talk with you about your new book. Congratulations.
Well, thanks for having me. I miss talking to you on the air, so this is great.
Dr. Laurie Betito, author of The Sex Bible for People Over 50, the complete guide to sexual love for mature couples. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com, go to the What's On page for this show, which is show number 0268, and you'll find the links to Laurie's website, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order her book directly.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or hear all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.